I'm not going to spend any time with this. Barry talked about it, you probably heard it this morning. These concepts, these principles, I hear a lot of people say, well, that just doesn't work here. Well, these principles work everywhere. You can go anywhere on the globe, any soil, any climate. It may look totally different where Heather's from than it does in the Midwest where I'm from, but the principles remain. And I had one that Barry didn't have, although I was proud of Barry. I did see one of his pictures that had cows in it. That's really great, Barry. Okay, so that last one is, I think, important to note that if you look at the most productive soils on the globe, most of them were developed with the involvement of a ruminant. So I'm here to talk about diversity, right? And I'm going to start off by telling you that back when, you need to know where it come from, back when corn prices were real high, we raised nothing but corn for 4 years. And we were devout soil health people back then. We were no-tilling, we were using cover crops. We didn't understand biology yet. But you might ask why I did that. Well, does anybody in here pay taxes to the federal government? Anybody? Nope. I'm going to call the IRS. They got it. Well, it's your fault. It's your fault I did this. Because my subsidized crop insurance was such that it was guaranteeing me so much money just to plant the corn, whether I ever harvested it or not, that it was financially crazy not to do it, even though this is agronomically asinine. And we did it successfully. I mean, but here's what it takes. It took the GMO corn, it took fungicides, insecticides, herbicides, fertilizer. We had to throw the kitchen sink at it. We did really good. We made a lot of money. But then some things happened. 2015, I had a chance to get an Eisenhower fellowship. I spent 3 months in New Zealand and Australia. And that started to change the way I look at the landscape when I came home. And what really struck me over there, in a world where there's no subsidies whatsoever, is how diverse their agriculture was. And on the farms I was on, 80% of them raised at least 5 different crops. Now, if you've been through the Midwest, when's the last time you drove 600 miles and saw 3 crops, more than 3 crops? Okay? And by the way, 2 crops is not a rotation. Look it up in Webster's. Also, over half the farms over there had a livestock component. At least part of the time that land in the rotation was spent under hoof. And by the way, there were very few places that did 100% no-till the way we're so proud of, or were. They did a little tillage here and there. They understood that it wasn't something they wanted to do any more than they had to, but they still did some. But they made up for it through their diversity, and the length of their rotations, and what I call the time under hoof. That started to change the way I saw the world. And then along about the same time, I was at a conference and I got to listen to Jill Clapper. And if any of you who's had the chance to hear Jill speak, well, she changed forever the way I think of the soil and look at the world. And it took a while to soak in. When she started talking about plants talking to one another, I kind of, oh my God. But then I watched a video, and this is a great video. If you haven't seen it, if you Google on YouTube how plants talk to each other, it's like 54 minutes long. And it's unbelievable time-release photography of just that. They did all kinds of experiments, and it really changed fundamentally how I view soil management, soil health, and how we want to operate our farm. So as a result of all that, we went from continuous corn to corn, soybeans. We put wheat in the rotation. Wheat's a money loser for us on the surface, but it gives us that opportunity to have a growing season to do a complex cocktail, a 12-plant cocktail, and have time for all these plants to do something for us. When you look at the benefits of that, how it affects subsequent corn and soybean crops, I can make the economic argument that we're more profitable with wheat in the rotation than not, but that's another day. We've also added, and Barry alluded to it earlier, that, and I think Joel Gruber must have talked about this morning, I didn't see this morning's session, but we need more perennial components. Perennial plants bring something that annual plants don't. And when we talk about diversity, we're not talking about just warm season, cool season, legume, grass, forb, broadleaf. We're talking about perennials as well. So alfalfa and pasture have become a part of our management mix. What we've seen is that as diversity increases, weed pressure decreases, pest pressure decreases, fertility needs decrease, inputs in general decrease, and yields increase. That's a pretty good recipe for the bottom line. Here's a field that I'll tell you about this project in a minute, but what you see on the left side of the picture is no cover crop, and on the right is with a cereal ride cover crop ahead of the soybeans, and there's been no herbicide applied to that field anywhere. Okay, that's the power of cover crops, biology, diversity. Not only did we have a substantial decrease in our per acre input costs, and easily over $100 an acre that we're not spending today that we would have been spending 5 years ago. But we're also, because of the agronomic stability that this diversity has given us, we're able to eliminate GMO grains and we don't need the traits anymore. And most of those traits are really just to make up for poor agronomic practices. If you fix the agronomy, you don't need them. And so we cut a lot of expense out there, but also in our area, we're able to get a 10 to 15% premium now for our output, and our yields have maintained and or increased. I didn't put increased, but I believe they have, but we need a few more years to say that for sure. You know, what's next? We think that SawedOff may unlock our ability to raise $10 corn. That's our next project. In Indiana, we have it's called CCSI. What's that stand for, Barry? Conservation Cropping System Initiative. And it's a neat thing. It's basically 12 farms around the state that all agree to do on-farm research related to SawedOff. And in our case, we did plots, which you saw earlier, where we used no cover crops. We did everything else the same in the field, but we left these blocks with no cover crop. And then Purdue and some NRCS people come in and they do exhaustive soil studies. They do the conventional soil tests, Cornell, Haney, PLFA, Earthfort, you know, some I can't even spell or name probably. And not only did they compare on our farm, which my field that this was done in has been over 30 years of continuous no-till, 15 years with cover crops. But then they went across the fence line. Our neighbor was generous enough to allow us to come do all this tests on his conventional field, which is corn, bean, corn, bean, corn, bean, no cover crops, tillage ahead of corn, but not ahead of beans. The good news was that we have seen a significant increase in organic matter. On this farm, when I bought it, it was under 2%. It was about 1.8 on average. Today, it's close to 4. We've seen some structural improvements in the soil, the aggregate stability and so forth. We did see significantly more mycorrhizal fungi. Still not near enough to be functional as a system, but signs that we're moving in the right direction. And after the cocktail year, we did see increases in the Haney soil health score and soil respiration. But some bad news too. And by a lot of the measures we're looking at, biologically speaking, our farm is not only is the no cover crop area not significantly different, but we're not that significantly different from our neighbor in terms of the function of our soil biology. This was kind of a sobering moment for me and really caused me to pause and think about what is it? You know, we've been 30 years of no-till, we're using cover crops. This hasn't seen synthetic fertilizer except for nitrogen, it's been manure. You know, a lot of the great things, and productivity has been really good, but it's still biologically, we're not having it yet. And so the answer why, we go back to these 5 principles. First off, when we look at minimize disturbance, we always think about that as, well, we're not tilling, right? Well, in this case, this field hadn't been tilled in 30 years. But tillage is not the only kind of disturbance. Chemicals provide a disturbance biologically. Glyphosate in particular is very disruptive or disturbing to different microbes and soil fungi. We've been using that. All our use of fungicides, insecticides, again, very disturbing to those critters below ground. So we really have to redefine what we mean when we say disturbance. It's not just tillage. And that's an area we need to improve on. Keeping the soil covered. So this is a picture of one of our 12-way cocktails. That's my youngest son in there. And that's almost 6 foot tall. We raised 124 bushel wheat. We didn't take the straw. We put some manure on. We raised this cover crop. And I spent all winter worrying, waking up in the middle of the night thinking, how am I going to plant this? And this is planted on the state highway. This is all the neighbors are seeing this and saying, what's this crazy guy doing now? And I've got to make this work. I don't want to be a bad example. There's lots of people who want this to fail, right? So that's what that same field looked like. That's about June 15th. So I thought, boy, we've got it going now. We're going to keep the soil covered, right? We remove all that biomass. Where'd it go? It's gone. So we've got a lot of work to do to keep, 124 bushel wheat straw, all that biomass. By the time this plant goes reproductive, we've got 80% bare soil. And that's unacceptable to me. So we need to work harder at that. Keeping a living root. We obviously have a crop growing from May to 1st of September. And then we've got a gap, and we're getting a cover crop going maybe late September, early October, typically on average, and that gets going. And then mostly through the winter, we don't have anything. And then sometimes in the spring, we're leaving a lot of gaps here, folks. And this is where perennial plants need to come into the mix. The perennial plant is the best way to ensure that living root. And this is really important because these soils were all designed to operate on this mycorrhizal system. Think of mycorrhizal fungi as the underground infrastructure, the roads, the telecommunications lines, all these things that we think of in infrastructure. That's what mycorrhizal fungi do below the soil. And if we don't have a living root there, they run out of food and they shut down. So if we want to maximize our soil health, we've got to do a much better job at keeping a living root out there all the time. Diversity. We've taken strides. We've gone from continuous corn and corn beans. We've got wheat. We're doing some alfalfa, some pasture. We're doing our cocktails, but there's still a lot. When you think of the native prairie, there's 100 different species of plant in an acre of native prairie. That's how the system is designed to work. And we'll never get to that, but we've got a lot of room for improvement over where we're at now to improve our soil biology. And then the ruminant impact is something, obviously, we need to work harder at as well. After 2 generations of tearing fence rows out, we're actually starting to build them all back. And my oldest son, fortunately, is interested in livestock, and we're building a cow herd, and we want to make it so that's part of our system, part of our rotation. We spend time under hoof. Real quick, I always laugh at this. Some of the gurus in crop production use Liebig. Well, Liebig was a German scientist back, I don't know when, but his was a very chemical approach. He explained the limitation on crop yield as a function of the availability of nutrients. I find this to be hogwash, but I think we can take this concept and use it for our own good. And after David Montgomery, if you've never read David's books, Dirt, Erosion, Civilization, Hidden Half of Nature, Growing Revolution, all incredible books that have helped form our ideas about soil health. And he does a great job as a geologist of really breaking things down and simplifying them. But again, we're using Liebig's barrel, and this is my own artwork, so excuse me, you probably can't read it, but I've got the minimize disturbance and diversity and keep the soil covered and manage grazing. Those are now our limiting factors. And if we want to grow soil health, we need to think about how we do these things. And they don't work individually. We need to manage them holistically. You know, they all affect each other. And when we don't have cover over the soil, our soil gets too hot in the summer, our microbes shut down. And now we're not making nutrients available to our plant when they go reproductive. I mean, all these things are interrelated, and we can't just look at one thing at a time. We have to look at them in relation to each other if we're going to be successful at this. There's all 5 principles together at once. And I'm getting the cue here that I'm done. There's some more of our diversity in action. When I was in New Zealand, a farmer had this on his wall, and you know, I always talk about, when I have more time, the power of failure. And we have to have the power to fail occasionally, to move forward, to learn, to push our systems, to make them better. And my parents would attest via this that I'm just stubborn enough to do that, and that says a lot about me. And this says a lot. The other thing I'd like to talk about to be successful, and it was discussed in the last presentation, is mindset. You have to have the attitude that I'm going to make it work, and the power of positive thinking will take you a long way. So, we're out of time. Questions?